In the pale light of January 23, 1989, Ted Bundy woke to a day like no other. He had lived years in the confines of Florida State Prison, within the gray walls and fluorescent lights of a solitary cell. But today, the atmosphere felt different. This was his final day. The relentless clock on death row counted down the last 24 hours of Bundy's life, bringing him steadily closer to a punishment he'd eluded for so long.
A judge in Miami today followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Theodore Bundy to die in the electric chair for the murder of two co-eds. Bundy is the 136th person under death sentence in Florida. Ed Rabel reports.
The advisory sentence rendered by the jury does hereby impose the death penalty upon the defendant Theodore Robert Bundy. Take care of yourself, young man. Thank you. I say that to you. Take care of yourself. It's a tragedy for this court to see such total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced.
Bundy's morning started as quietly as any other. The guards brought him a cup of coffee, its taste flat and stale. Though simple, that daily routine, a small comfort he once probably didn't even notice, took on a strange significance, knowing it was his last. As he sat alone in his cell, each sip must have added weight to the grim reality ahead. His mind must have been racing, calculating every angle as he so often had, but there was no escaping the harsh truth. Today, there would be no loophole, no delays, no escape. By 8 a.m., his attorneys, Paulie Nelson and Jim Coleman, were working furiously. These two were his last lifeline, filing final appeals in the state and federal courts, hoping to buy him just a few more hours. They argued that Bundy was mentally incompetent, that he wasn't fit to be executed, perhaps believing a last-minute miracle could save him. But the court saw through it, each appeal promptly denied. Ironically, Bundy, who had studied law and represented himself so audaciously in court, now watched powerlessly as his fate slipped out of reach, every rejection pressing him further into a corner.
Ted, it is about 2:30 in the afternoon. You are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock if you don't receive another stay. What is going through your mind? What thoughts have you had these last few days?
Well, I won't kid you to say that it's something that I feel that I am in control of and that I've come to terms with, because I haven't.
By noon, the U.S. Supreme Court dismissed his final request. Bundy's remaining time became a countdown, not of days or weeks, but of hours. With his legal options exhausted, he was left alone to grapple with what lay ahead. In those quiet, soul-crushing moments, he must have felt his own mortality bearing down on him, a foreign concept for a man who'd spent a lifetime defying it. Then came a moment Bundy likely dreaded even more than the execution itself, a visit from his mother, Louise. Despite the mountains of evidence, Louise Bundy had clung to her belief in her son's innocence. She stood by him through years of trials and headlines, through the whispered horrors and gasped revelations. But on that afternoon, the illusion was gone. Their meeting was brief, barely 15 minutes, but loaded with all the emotion that had simmered under the surface for years. She loved him, yes, but now there was no escaping what he'd done, and that knowledge lingered between them. When she left, tears blurred her vision as the finality of her son's fate struck her, harder than ever before. In the afternoon, Bundy met with Fred Lawrence, his spiritual advisor. Over the years, Bundy had shown an interest in faith, maybe as a final desperate grasp for redemption. Was he genuinely searching for forgiveness, or was this yet another manipulation in his lifelong game of deception? Only Bundy knew. Witnesses noted that he appeared almost reflective, caught between fear and calm, a man who perhaps couldn't fathom the darkness within himself. Around 5 p.m., Bundy sat down for one last interview. James Dobson, a Christian broadcaster, had come to give him one final shot at telling his story. In that interview, Bundy placed blame on an addiction to violent pornographic material, suggesting it had warped his mind, fueled his rage, and fed his homicidal urges. To some, it sounded hollow, a rehearsed excuse from a man who'd spent his life crafting personas to manipulate others. Bundy expressed regret, or at least attempted to, but his words carried little weight. Even in this last moment, he clung to the guise of innocence, casting himself as a victim, rather than the monster he'd revealed himself to be.
I can't really talk about that right now. That's weird.
It's too painful.
I would like to, be able to convey to you what that experience is like, but I can't deny.
After the interview, Bundy was offered his last meal. death row inmates often choose elaborate meals, as if a final indulgence could somehow soften what's to come. But Bundy declined to make any special requests. Instead, he was served the standard meal: steak, eggs, toast with butter and jelly, milk, and juice. But barely a bite was eaten. Whatever remained of his appetite had been swallowed up by fear, anticipation, and perhaps a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in years: genuine dread. As evening settled over the prison, the atmosphere grew tense, charged with an almost electric energy. Outside, crowds gathered, filling the air with a mix of emotions. Some came to protest, their signs held high in opposition to the death penalty, but others, a much larger group, came to witness the end of a nightmare that had terrorized a nation. They came for closure, for justice. They held signs and chanted, celebrating what they saw as the long overdue punishment for a man who had left a trail of devastation in his wake. Fireworks, cameras, and cheers from the crowd punctuated the night, each a reminder that while justice was coming, it would never erase the pain he had caused. Inside his cell, Bundy's infamous bravado had vanished. The man who once taunted police and charmed women with ease now looked, as one guard noted, like a ghost. His lawyer and the prison chaplain visited him in his cell, but by then, he was a broken man. Though they offered him words of comfort, their presence likely only reminded him of the fast approaching end. As midnight passed, Bundy lay awake in his cell. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant clamor of the crowd, the cold, sterile air, all of it added to the haunting stillness. He was offered medication to help him sleep, but whether he took it remains a mystery. The hours crept on, each one slipping away, bringing him closer to what he knew would be his final moments. At dawn on January 24, 1989, guards came to Bundy's cell. He was given time to shower and dress in clean clothes. His steps, usually confident and assured, were now uncertain as he walked down the narrow hallway toward the execution chamber. The guards flanked him on both sides, their faces solemn as they led him to his final destination. He had lived his life on his own terms, but now, every movement, every gesture was dictated by a process he had no power over. Just before 7 a.m., Bundy was led into the chamber. The witnesses, 42 in all, including journalists, prison staff, and family members of some of his victims, sat in silence, watching as Bundy was strapped into the electric chair. His head was shaved to ensure contact for the electrodes, and a soaked sponge was placed beneath the cap to conduct the voltage. It was a grim, ritualistic process, each step reminding him and everyone present of what was about to unfold. When asked if he had any final words, Bundy's response was simple and brief. "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends."
You have a final statement you'd like to make?
Yes. Tell my family I love them.
Then, as he fell silent, the executioner pulled the switch. In seconds, the room filled with the hum of electricity as 2,000 volts coursed through his body. Witnesses later reported seeing his body tense, then go limp. The time of death was recorded at 7:16 a.m.
Bundy was executed for the murder of a 12-year-old girl in Florida.
As news of his execution spread, the crowd outside erupted in cheers, fireworks lighting up the morning sky. It was a moment of long-awaited relief, a symbol of justice served, of a nightmare brought to an end. Signs waved triumphantly and voices chanted, their collective relief echoing through the Florida morning. Ted Bundy's ashes were reportedly scattered in the Cascade Mountains, a place where he had left so many shattered lives behind. His death marked the end of a story that had horrified and captivated the world. The debate over Bundy's final moments, whether he felt true remorse or faced justice as defiantly as he lived, remains unresolved. In the end, all that's left are the questions. Could such a man ever feel genuine regret? Was his death a true measure of justice for his monstrous crimes? Share your thoughts below. And for more chilling stories like this, don't forget to hit subscribe.